Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to give 1 or 2 more minutes to give people a chance to log in, but we'll get started very soon. And please go ahead. Also, if you'd like to maybe just jump in the chat window and introduce yourselves. Maybe tell us your name, where you're from, and if you'd like, maybe one thing that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. So what brings you here today? Morning, Landon. Hi, Dory. So for folks who are just joining now, we're just waiting maybe an extra 60 seconds just to give folks a chance to log into the webinar. Feel free to jump into the chat, let us know who you are, what you do, and something that you'd be interested in learning today. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, for being here. Super excited to be sharing this hour with you. We're going to have a great conversation about customer pressure around sustainability. So hopefully you'll leave the webinar today having learned something new. We're going to talk about what the pressures are, where they're coming from, as well as some strategies and best practices for how to handle them. So we got a great group of panelists here, so I'll let everybody introduce themselves. Maybe I'll start really quickly. So my name is Hadrian. I work at Greenly with Salua. Greenly's carbon accounting and sustainability company. We build tools to help sustainability professionals, non-professionals alike, measure emissions, reduce emissions, comply with different regulations. So long story short, we get to work with a lot of clients and organizations that experience customer pressure, as well as apply some pressure of their own. So excited to be here.
Hi, everybody. I see that we have people from different countries today. This is amazing. My name is Salua. I'm a climate and ESG reporting expert at Greenly. So I work mostly with our clients who are in North America, but I also have a number of clients who are in Europe, and I see that some of them are connected today. So as a climate expert, I help my clients for their carbon assessments on our platform, and I also support a number of our clients for any legislative or any disclosure linked to a regulation, so CSRD and other ones. I'm very happy today to be here and share what we do at Greenly and how we support our clients.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Livingston. I work for Technology Partners, which is a technology solutions company headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. I do all of our sustainability and disclosures, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah. I am the Environmental Project Coordinator for G2 Revolution. We are a specialty recycling company in Illinois and Ohio, and I manage our environmental projects and certifications, as well as the emissions accounting for the company. So thank you for everyone for joining us today.
Right. And we're going to be keeping things pretty conversational, so please feel free to jump in. We do have some time at the end for a Q&A, but we'd love to hear from you throughout. So don't hesitate to drop questions, comments in the chat. And so we'll dive right into it, maybe starting with the big question. So who would like to take this one? What are the pressures and where are they coming from?
I can start this one. So I feel like regarding GHG reporting specifically, I have kind of 2 different perspectives. One is the pressure you feel before you start reporting and the pressure that you feel right in the middle of it. So I think we'll see some recurring themes throughout this discussion, but just to kick us off, Do companies want to start reporting because maybe it makes sense based off the industry that they're in? Maybe you're a high emitting business, or you're in an industry where reporting gives you a competitive advantage. Maybe you're trying to market sustainability and that's a goal of yours and this would help you get there. Or is there a regulation that could affect the functionality of your business if you don't report? And then, of course, there's probably the most common one is it important to your audience and your stakeholders, especially for public companies? Is it attractive to your investors for them to see that you know and you're very aware of the steps your business is taking to be accountable and recognize your emissions? And then I would say there's a lot of pressure in the middle of reporting your emissions and gathering that data. Being aware of all your sources and the actual full scope of your footprint. I think as you try to learn more about the sources of your emissions as a business, you tend to learn more about your company, and then things pop up, and then you have to kind of figure out how to fit that into your scope. And then when it comes to sharing your footprint or your reporting, there's pressure to make sure you have a plan to mitigate or reduce. Everyone wants to hear the so what. So like you come out with your actual report and people want to see what are you going to do about it. So I would say that there's a lot of pressure in the beginning stages of reporting, what pushes you to get there. And then there's definitely pressure throughout, even once you commit to gathering that data.
It's funny because I was thinking about pressure coming from, maybe clients or customers asking for some kind of action, whether it's sustainability reporting or double materiality assessments, alignment with other, frameworks. But it's interesting to also think about the pressure. I think you're speaking to the pressure of doing things right, which is huge.
It seems like it can be highly critical, or people are worried to publish things out there. And so even though you want to start and it's something that'll be a good step for your company or your business, there's pressure and it's intimidating to make sure you want to do it the right way. Is it verified, or do you make sure that you know everything about your business and nothing's like hiding around the corner?
Yeah. And I think kind of what you're talking about too is being proactive versus reactive with things like this, and, evaluating legislative pressure versus market pressure, depending on the demographic of your business and where you're located. Your European companies face CSRD. There's not as many official pressures in the US. It's mostly market and customer driven. But, in thinking about so we're in the professional services industry. And so we provide services to companies in a lot of different industries, and trying to evaluate that by where we think the pressure will come from next has been huge for us. So, for example, we have companies that are heavily reliant on natural resources that are a pretty big portion of our revenue. And we additionally have a customer in the insurance industry. And so looking at current pressures, but then also thinking strategically about where they could be coming from, I think will help you maintain a competitive advantage over some of your competitors.
And Salu, I know you've worked with a lot of clients at Greenly that come to us because of pressure. Curious to hear, do you have any stories or anecdotes that you can share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I very much aligned with what Hannah and Alexis were saying. I think what I see mostly with the clients that I support is, especially those are a little bit smaller, that are part of the supply chain of a big multinational, and they come to us telling us, oh, this one of our biggest customers is asking us to be compliant with this regulation, or to be on track towards net zero. And them being quite small, not necessarily having the tools to know exactly how to do it, what it actually means, what it would mean for them, for their size, and where the nature of their business. I think this top-down pressure can make some clients a little bit worried about whether they do have the tools, the resources, either financial or human resources, to tackle the challenge. I think that's one of the biggest pressures that I've been seeing. But what's good, and I think that's the fun part about our job at Greenly is to see that we have this big challenge that is reducing our emissions at a global level, but what does it mean for each company, each organization of various sizes, of various sectors, and how we could adapt the trajectories and the strategies to reduce these emissions for each profile. So I think that's the fun part about my job personally. I think that's the biggest pressure that I've been seeing recently.
And I think there's many different types of pressure as well, and we'll definitely dive into that as well. Maybe really quick, as you mentioned, especially some large organizations putting pressure. An example is asking their supply chain to measure emissions. Is probably one of the ones that comes to mind most easily. One of the trends that we're seeing is that historically, if we go back a couple of years, people used to look at those Scope 3 emissions and say, well, these are indirect emissions. We can't really do much about this. And now I think there's a change in perspective where they're realizing for a lot of organizations, that's the majority of their emissions. Up to 90% is not unusual. They're realizing actually there is a lot that we can do around that. And it makes sense to target your biggest source of emissions, especially since compared to Scope 1 and Scope 2, implementing a supplier engagement, and there's different names for it, right? Eco-purchasing policies, whatever you want to call it. It's a great bang for the buck. It can be a lot cheaper than other initiatives for reducing emissions.
Yeah, and I think for supplier engagement, it's challenging. It's one of the most challenging things that you could do is reduce your Scope 3 emissions. But I think that when each one at their own level is able to engage their own supply chain, and it creates this domino effect where each supplier is just engaging their supplier and until we get to the source of the emission itself. And that's of course the goal, but it can be challenging depending on the sectors and the nature of the company's business.
Absolutely. My burning question now is, how do we do it? But before we go there, I'd love to just ask, we talked about the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, SBTi, CDP, EcoVadis, so all these different standards and frameworks. First, what are these, and how do they tie in with customer pressure?
Yeah, so it can be, we hear a lot of different names, and we also hear a lot of different words used. So a framework versus a standard versus a regulation, a guideline, and they're used interchangeably when they shouldn't. So it's very important to be very precise about the words that are being used. So there are a lot of different standards and frameworks that we can talk about, and there's so much to say, but let's focus on these 4 here because they're the most relevant, they're the most popular, and they're the ones that you'll hear about a lot. But let's differentiate between these 4. So you have first the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. It's a framework. It's a framework to measure and manage your emissions for your scopes 1, 2, and 3. It's really the foundation for emissions accounting at the international level. So sometimes you will have, for example, in France, a specific framework that is called BGS, but the GHG Protocol is more at the international level. It's the guidelines that we follow, for example, for our US clients or in the UK. So it's a framework. Any organization, company, business, NGO looking to calculate or assess their emissions would follow the guidelines of this protocol. That would be for the GHG Protocol. That's the first step, to assess your emissions, to understand where they're coming from, to identify your main sources of emissions. Then when you have your carbon footprint and when you understand what are your most emitting sources, the logical next step would be to identify ways to reduce them and set targets to reduce them. So that's when you will start thinking about setting targets, having a trajectory, building a climate strategy and an action plan. One of the ways to do it is to follow the guideline of SBTi, so the Science Based Targets Initiative. It's an initiative that validates the climate targets, the corporate climate targets, based on scientific criteria that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. So when in 2015, when we had the Paris Agreement, we knew that at the global level, we needed to reduce our emissions and everybody had to contribute in some way. This initiative came to clarify exactly what it would mean for companies or organizations or cities to reduce these emissions. So there are specific guidelines, a lot of different rules that apply and don't apply, and but their goal is really to allow us to understand if I'm a startup or if I'm a multinational or if I'm an NGO, by how much I should be reducing my emissions to be on track for everything that was agreed upon during the Paris agreements.
Yeah. And maybe just to jump in on these, I think a lot of this is really about aligning to industry standards and best practices and not reinventing the wheel. So the pressure is not coming from these frameworks necessarily, but it's more coming from customers, and customers are using these frameworks as a vehicle, saying, we're not just going to ask people to kind of reinvent everything. Let's use what's already being created and is considered industry standards. And each sort of framework serves a different purpose. So you might encounter different ones based on what your customers really care about most. So for doing greenhouse gas assessment, it's going to be no brainer. You're going to do greenhouse gas protocol up in the US and most other countries. And then if the primary objective is to reduce emissions in line with scientific targets, then it would be SBTi, right, Sula?
Yes, absolutely. And if you would like to submit targets to SBTi, it's really if you are motivated to have a robust action plan, because those targets are very ambitious, and it implies investment, time, money, human resources as well. So yeah.
So I'm curious, for CDP then, how would you describe that vehicle?
Yeah. So then we just shift to other terms to use. So this is not a framework. It's not a standard. It's a disclosure system. So we try to do this in phases. So first you assess the emissions, GHG Protocol. You set targets if you'd like, following the SBTi guidelines. And then if you want to disclose and if you want to be rated, for example, for your performance, your environmental performance, there are different ways to do it. There are different companies, initiatives out there. Two of them are CDP and EcoVadis. So CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, it's a global disclosure system to report your impacts, to report your emissions, your action plan, your strategy, your targets. And it's used by investors to evaluate corporate sustainability of a company. So the main goal of CDP is really to report on an annual basis your emissions and your progress against the targets that you may have set before. And it allows companies and investors to see your progress over time. And so completely different from the two topics, the two elements that we were just talking about. It's a survey that you answer online on an annual basis. There's an annual disclosure cycle. And you can get a rating based on how ambitious you are in your climate strategy, based on the efforts that you've been pulling, and also the objectives that you're setting for the next 5 to 10 years.
And Alexis and Hannah, I know when we were chatting, we're talking about some of the pressures that you have experienced yourselves. I'd love to hear sort of what pressures you've seen, from your own supply chains.
So we've been asked to disclose through both CDP and EcoVadis and have done so. CDP is a lot more strictly environment oriented, whereas EcoVadis brings in kind of more HR and human rights components, like Salua was saying. It is the CDP has a consistent reporting structure, and that it opens at a certain time and it closes at a certain time, whereas EcoVadis is annual. And so something we're in the process of doing right now is trying to align those in our yearly plans so that we're not doing them both at the same time. And it's interesting to, I would encourage anyone to, even if you decide not to submit for scoring, to submit and explore the questions, because it makes you consider components of your own, like what you're doing against the questions that they're asking, and just kind of helps you be more strategic for the next year. And perhaps like it asks a question and you didn't think, oh, like maybe we should be doing that, or something like that. So it's a really, even if you don't want to submit for scoring, it's a really good opportunity to explore how you can hone in on your environmental
That's a great
commitments.
point. And I feel like that's a question we see so often too. Is like, how do we know how we're doing? How are we doing compared to the industry, to our competitors, just others in general? So submitting to these different frameworks can be a great way of doing that. I'm curious, you mentioned having been asked both to submit to EcoVadis and CDP. Was that from the same customer of yours, or were they separate requests?
They were separate requests, and they're in completely different industries too. But those are the two that we've primarily seen, and it's also like with other customers we see typically EcoVadis or CDP. We haven't had a third disclosure introduced yet, so hoping that we
you might have just jinxed it.
I know I need to knock on wood or something. Yeah, as far as like US experience and stuff like that, those are the two that we've primarily seen.
Yeah, I would say just to tack on to that last one, and then we can move on really quick. But Hadrian, you mentioned it's a good way to gauge, and especially for like G2, we are, I would say, a small and medium-sized business. And so it's interesting for EcoVadis specifically, because that's one that we've reported to or submitted. It definitely highlights areas that maybe they have expectations for really larger companies that would regularly have policies in place. They really have a keep a close eye on policies specifically through EcoVadis. And so as a smaller to medium-sized business, it's interesting to see policies that we could update, or it pushes us in a good direction for sure. So those can be helpful tools to gauge where you stand, and helpful tools to help push you to where you'd like to be as well.
Yeah, no, I love this. And we're actually going to talk about this more as well, because I think it's one of the sort of the exciting topics from all this is, yes, there's customer pressure, so there's value in responding to that. But, and I think what you're highlighting here is that there's real benefits to doing this that go beyond that. So we'll make sure to chat about that. But before we jump into that, what challenges have you seen? I know it's sometimes easier said than done.
Yeah, I would say right off the bat, when we were gathering data and trying to figure out what this would look like to measure our emissions, establishing our boundary to avoid any double counting and understanding kind of what data belongs in your footprint and what doesn't was a big challenge, just to make sure you fully understand your company and the scope of your company, right? So when Salua was talking about the GHG Protocol, they have in their scope 3 like 15 different categories of data that you can apply to. And maybe not every category will apply to your business. And so, for example, we're a service-based company, so we don't create a product, so there wouldn't be any emissions related to products like that other than product purchasing. So we have to keep a close eye on what data is ours, what data might actually be or belong to a footprint of someone we work with. And so a big challenge is making sure you clearly understand what data belongs to you in the scope of the framework that you're working with.
And accidentally omitting emissions from your operations, that's actually something that's more common than one might think, which can represent some risk. So I think that part is sort of definitely something to pay attention to, and making sure, and it's okay to exclude some categories so long as it's properly disclosed and a justification is provided. I think where sometimes companies can get in trouble is if you came having had a full greenhouse gas assessment, but then the next year you realize, oh shoot, we didn't properly define those boundaries, and have actually emitted a significant portion of our emissions.
Right, especially as a business that we manage waste for other clients. So it's important for us to distinguish, okay, so what are we as a business emitting to function versus what are we handling for clients that emit or waste that they generate on their end, and what do we take on, especially in our reporting. So I think a challenge you would face to start reporting is establishing your boundaries, but once you do establish that boundary, being confident about it, reporting it and disclosing that boundary so that people who may have eyes on your report understand why you may have included or excluded any data is important.
I think also like maybe more generally is just like kind of the learning curve that goes with that. A lot of times when, you know, so kind of like you were saying, how these big organizations are like, okay, you guys, we want to know this. Who in the organization is equipped to handle that? And I think that's the benefit of working with a company like Greenly is some of that learning curve is taken care of because you have a climate expert and a platform that provides guidance and walkthrough. Another piece of it is just that stakeholder buy-in, getting your company executives or whoever those key decision makers are on board, because there's challenges that come with actually reporting. But then when you talk about integrating policies that make meaningful change so that you can do those um, those meet those reduction goals, that's something that everybody has to work together on, and it's not something that one individual person can do for an entire organization. So I think having that, like once you kind of can overcome the learning curve and get that that buy-in from those key people, it's about then sharing the mission amongst the company and making everybody kind of see the importance, or enough of the company seeing the importance to be able to work towards meeting those reduction goals.
Yeah.
I would say, from my perspective, what's a little bit challenging sometimes is to find the balance between, we have clients that need to respond to pressures and have some harsh deadlines, but also delivering an assessment of a high quality and data results and data that are very precise, and trying to push our clients and challenge them to provide us with the most precise data that they can find. So for those who are familiar with this would know the difference between financial and activity data, but for those who are not, to do a carbon assessment, the baseline metric that we use are your financials, your expenses. We try to estimate emissions based on that. But to get more accurate results, we try to understand what's behind that dollar value, the liters of or gallons of fuel that was consumed, or the amount of plastic that was purchased. And finding that data is not intuitive, and is not the availability of that data is not necessarily a no-brainer for all companies. So trying to challenge, so finding that balance between, okay, I need to respond to my customer pressure, my business partner pressure to deliver a carbon footprint, but also trying to get a carbon footprint and carbon assessment that is very precise and with a high data quality, I think sometimes can be tricky.
Yeah, it seems like sort of the time component and quality sometimes they're competing against one another.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the benefits of starting early, and what you were saying, Alexis, identifying those people in your organization, especially if you're working at a larger organization. Often folks have other things on their roadmaps, and so it's kind of starting those conversations early and setting up those data pipelines, essentially. And I would say in the vast majority of cases, probably 99% of companies that we work with, every year they're going to improve that precision of the report, because every year they're going to learn about the data they're going to need and figure out how to improve the precision. And the last thing I might add too is think about your goals. Sometimes it's a trade-off. Maybe more precision is not going to have that big of an impact. So we always like to think about what is the effort required, and how do we use technology, right, to make it easier as well. We can set up integrations, automate a lot of the processes. But the rule of thumb is focus on your largest emissions categories, and this is where you really want to focus your energies and trying to get the most level of precision and trying to get the most data. Alexis, you mentioned something earlier that I'd like to jump back to, and I feel like it's probably the perfect segue for the next section, because you mentioned, we talked about, you mentioned value, and you mentioned sometimes the difficulty of getting buy-in from maybe executives, other folks. I don't know if you have any folks on the call working at ESG teams. I think sometimes that can be difficult to sort of get the resources that we need and sort of the momentum. One of my favorite topics here is looking at additional values that you can unlock from sustainability initiatives. I think so you can refer to as multidimensional values. It's a fancy way of saying, yes, you can unlock additional, you can respond to the business pressure, the client pressure, increase your revenue, but there's also other collateral benefits. Curious from your experience, do you have any examples of what those sort of additional values might be that you can unlock through sustainability initiatives?
I think anytime, especially like we're in talking about customer pressure, anytime that you can reflect back to your customer that what they are saying to you and what they are asking for matters is important. And obviously, as a business, we want to do that as much as possible. What's important to our customers is important to us. And so, being able to, initially when we got engaged with Greenly and were being asked to comply, it was reactive pressure. So instead of, we're kind of to the place now where instead of being reactive, we're able to be more proactive with the stances that we take. And that only comes through time and consistent reporting. But I think what that ends up producing is you become a partner that is listening to what your customer says. It helps with your brand image as far as, you say what you're going to do and then you do what you say. And being able to use those disclosure platforms to have year-over-year evidence of doing that's tangible for your customers to see, can really add business value. And it's also something that, a lot of companies are increasingly putting this type of thing on their website. And, just in using disclosures alone and being transparent about what you're up to can give, even potential customers insight as to the fact that this is important to you.
I would agree with that. I feel like the website aspect that you mentioned as well, especially, whenever we go to a website of a different business or company that we're kind of looking at, we of course love as much transparency as we can get that they're publishing on their website. And if we visit a website that's not really talking about what they're up to, what their goals are, what they care about, then it's hard for us to get on board with the mission of that company that we're maybe thinking about working with. And so I would definitely agree that it adds value to communicating your messaging and what's important to you and what you're paying attention to, for sure.
And I'm curious if you've seen this concept of a submerged value. I think it's a term that was coined by Daniel Aronson in a book he wrote, The Value of Values. Wonder if there's other sort of tangential values that you've experienced from this. So the one that comes to my mind is, for example, HR benefits, where we know that companies that have engaged in climate strategy and sort of responding to the climate pressure can unlock additional benefits from that. And one of the ways that that can be done is by communicating about your climate strategy, both internally and externally. And research has shown that it can help reduce attrition and turnover, as well as help recruit talent. I'm wondering if you've experienced any of this or have experienced other types of value that you weren't necessarily expecting by responding to the customer pressure.
I think by if you are able to submit to some of these disclosure platforms, the fact that many companies are using these same disclosure frameworks to view and make decisions is really helpful, because you put in the same level of effort every year, and the more companies that are interested in these results, it's the same amount of work for you, but it's exponentially like demonstrates your value to a multitude of different clients. And so that's something we love to see in something that we're kind of seeing too is sustainability being incorporated into contracts, as far as commitment to providing emissions data. It's almost kind of like, companies will say, we have the right to audit you about things related to this agreement and stuff like that. Like, we're increasingly seeing that come into play with some of the bigger organizations that we partner with. And so, kind of going back to the submerged value piece, the greater reliance on these disclosure platforms, where we're seeing benefit in that.
Yeah, and I might add that that value, the sort of the additional business value that you can create, you don't necessarily unlock it automatically. So it's not because you do greenhouse gas assessment, right, that all of a sudden you're going to tap into reduced attrition, increased talent acquisition, better strategic, long-term strategic decision making. I think that one of the key things is you have to be really intentional about those, because otherwise you run the risk of having the data, but if it doesn't get in the hands of the right people, it doesn't get shared, in the with whoever, you might not actually be able to make use of it. So one of my recommendations would be write down not just your primary objective. Maybe that primary objective is winning more business, meeting that customer pressure, but essentially brainstorm all the, sort of these other collateral benefits that you can extract from these initiatives. And that will force you to identify them and also quantify them, and identify if there's any specific steps that you have to take to make sure that you're unlocking their value. So in the case of the HR policy one, it might be reaching out to your communications team to come up with a comm strategy, both internally and externally. So we'd love to transition to the next question, which is, how do you build trust in doing this? I think we've seen a lot of things in the news about greenwashing, and now we're sort of seeing the other extreme where companies are starting to do greenwashing. How do you go about responding to this pressure in a way that's sort of fostering trust and sort of a constructive way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that you build trust when you are relatable, and when you're relatable, people can get on the same level with you. They can get on board with the expectation or the understanding that perfection is not possible, right? So within your reporting, if you understand that your boundaries of data are going to change as your business changes over time, and you own that in your reporting, people can relate to that and understand that your business will grow. And so maybe if you report 1 year and then the next year it grows, but you explain, oh, well, we've actually grown as a business, we adopted an additional facility, then they'll have a better understanding as to why your emissions have maybe increased, even though your goals overall are to decrease, or be smarter about the way you emit. So I think trying to be relatable in your report and communicating your data in a way that people can understand and really effectively comprehend, especially in a way that applies to your business, that would be the best bet in trying to build trust with customers.
I would echo everything that Hannah just said about transparency, and on those disclosures, they provide the opportunity to give notes on, reasoning why and stuff like that on the different questions. And so utilizing that and being consistent with your year-over-year disclosure. And I know this is something Slough and I have talked about, as far as, just like different concerns with things, and done is better than perfect. And so just like just to echo what Hannah said, being transparent, even if it's not the results you think that they want to see, it's better to to own it because it demonstrates transparency.
And also to be ready to so being transparent to say, okay, this is what happened year over year, but also be ready or have a game plan for how you want to tackle this in the future, how you would like to increase the precision of your assessments, how you are reorienting your action plan to adapt to these new results that you were not maybe that you didn't predict or that you didn't think would be the end results. So I think regardless of what your year 2 or your year 3 results are, being flexible, I think, is key, and understanding that this is that it changes every year depending on the sector, depending on also methodologies that change year over year, that is independent from the company itself and the organization itself. But being flexible to readapt and rethink these strategies and these action plans, I think, is also really, really key.
Lennon says progress is better than perfection, and couldn't agree more with that. And about being transparent, there's multiple ways of being transparent. I think one of them is providing context in your communications. So maybe if you're thinking about you're creating an impact report or corporate sustainability report, rather than saying, here's what our emissions are, you can say, here's where they are and here's how we're thinking about it. Here's the areas that we think we can improve next year. If there's exclusions, make sure they're addressing these. And part of that, I think, is also educating your stakeholders about why emissions calculations can change. Going back to what Salua was saying before, there's a lot of decisions to be made around sort of the precision level, whether using monetary data, activity data, proxies, primary data. And the research is always improving. So there's new emission factors coming out. And if we don't provide that context and people see emissions changing year over year, it can erode some of that trust. So really spending the time to communicate and educate your stakeholders about sort of all those different elements is one of the ways that you can build trust.
Hey, Darren, I think also tying back to what you were mentioning about greenwashing versus green hushing and how to build trust and avoid that. If I'm an audience member and I read a report with data that contextually doesn't make sense with the company that's reporting it, like maybe they are involved really largely in transportation, but they have one product, and so they do a life cycle assessment or they do a great improvement for a source of emissions that really doesn't have much to do with who they are and their mission. I'm going to want to see that a company like Amazon is doing something about their transportation and not so much about something
Absolutely.
that they're not involved with, right? So in terms of hushing, if you're not talking about the data that's important to the audience members that are reading your report, then they're going to feel like, well, why aren't you talking about the largest source of your emissions, right? Or if you try to share data that paints a better picture, like, oh, we have reduced 50% of our emissions in terms of the products that we have sold, but it's actually because you took half of the line off that you're actually providing as a product that you sell, then it's a different story, right? So you have to make sure you're being really clear about contextual data and making sure it aligns with who you are as a business and why that makes sense.
That is a great point. Yeah, and it's about focusing more on the material issues, and that's where double materiality assessment can also help. Not to say we shouldn't communicate about the small things that we're doing. If
right.
you're, I don't know, an office and you put in place a recycling program, that's great. Definitely mention it, but in the right context. So, right. So, love to add on a sort of a concrete note about actionable recommendations. What advice would you give to folks here on how to best get started and either get ready to respond to customer pressure or maybe respond to it if they've already experiencing it?
I would say recognizing kind of the exponential growth curve of the level of effort that's needed. At first, it can feel, really overwhelming, and there's a lot of different pieces of it. And, I know for us, we kind of did SBTi's, CDP, EcoVadis, and greenhouse gas like calculations all in 1 year. And so getting that off the ground took a significant push, but now being more in a maintenance mode and being able to make make decisions off of those initial pieces of data, it doesn't feel like as big of a lift. And just recognizing that that this isn't going to be fixed in a day, a week, a month, or anything. This is a long-term commitment, and the I don't want to say like giving yourself a break, but recognizing that there's a limited amount that you can do in a short period of time, but taking the appropriate action with, with that information, and deciding how your long-term goals can be supported by the small things that you're able to do, in the course of a week, in a month, whatever, whether it's, okay, next year we're going to have environmental policies. The year after that, we're going to have, or like maybe midway through that year, we're also going to do employee engagement with it, or just things like that. Like, don't try and fix this, or contribute to everything overnight. Like, be realistic in what you're going to be able to do time and resource wise, but what you can do, be aggressive about it.
Yeah, I love that. And you learn a lot so much just by going through the process. So.
Mm-hmm.
You really do. I feel like walking through figuring out all of our sources of emissions allowed me to learn a lot more about the business that I'm a part of and every little department. And especially recognizing what Alexis said about, not expecting to do this overnight. And especially if if you don't have a team working on all of this and it's maybe just you, trying your best to delegate and actually utilize your different departments within the business. And I would say that that's a really big contributor. In terms of advice from my experience, I would say that using a database has been extremely helpful. Looking at different data types that's applicable to G2 Revolution specifically, or what would be applicable to your business. And also managing your data on regular intervals of time. So using the database, I would say before we started working with Greenly, we worked with a carbon accounting partner that we did everything very manually. Everything was like by hand. And so we had a lot less access to data in terms of looking at our initial footprints and taking this step to look at our footprint. And so working with the database, it asks you all the right questions after it really gets to know your business. And then it can hold on to that historical data and help you organize that data. Because data organization and keeping track of everything and making sure you looking at the same thing you looked at last year, or making sure if something has changed that you can see that. A database helps keep everything in one place. So I know in the chat, Ryan mentioned about wondering how Greenly has helped different businesses reach their goals and their sustainability initiatives. And so making the jump to a partner, working with a partner that has a database like Greenly does, the platform has made my life so much easier. And so I can manage that data and keep it organized. And then before we worked with Greenly, we were looking at mainly activity-based emissions. And so to have a partner that can look at your accounting and financial data and apply that has helped us really get a much better picture of our emissions, highlighted things that we didn't see before. And also that ties back into when your business changes, to own how that's going to affect your emissions, right? So our emissions looked like they increased between 1 year of the next, but for us, it was because we had access to more data. So it's important to be clear about that in your reporting, is to see if you see a significant jump in emissions, then you can recognize that. And then it all goes back to managing your time and not expecting this to work overnight. But if you manage your data on regular intervals, your life is going to be so much easier if you try to. And of course, this makes sense depending on, or it changes depending on your business. But if it makes sense to gather and track data on a monthly basis, or if you are shipping out a lot of products and you want to track that weekly, if you split it up over time and you don't save everything for the end of the year or something like that, then your life is going to be a lot easier.
It can sort of reduce that mad rush at the beginning of the year. Like, where's all the data? Do you have the CDP deadline and client deadlines to deal with? That's a great advice for sure.
For me, the main advice I would have is completely aligned with Hannah and Alexis. I think start small, be realistic, but I also think how customer pressure can be a top-down pressure or a top-down force. I think take this topic and just diffuse it across all teams and make it everybody's topic. I don't think it necessarily needs to come from just one person or one team, that sustainability team or that sustainability manager that is annoying everybody to be more sustainable or more aligned. I think to foster change, I think we need to plant those seeds everywhere possible. So across your supply chain, you start reviewing your business partnerships, try to see which suppliers are aligned where you're headed and those who are not, and make decisions based on that. Internally, you may have some employees that are not directly linked to the sustainability strategy that you're building, but you never know if you just provide them the actual trainings. Maybe these employees don't know much about these topics. Start small with trainings. You never know how in their line of business, in their everyday work, what impact that would have on the business decisions they'll make, their personal decisions as well at home when they're done working. So I think this topic is everybody's topic, and let's try to take this top-down pressure that we get from a business partner or a customer or from the market or from regulation, and just personalize it and own it so that everybody's on board and everybody's trying at their own level and with the resources that they have to actually spark change.
That's a great point. And one of the ways that I think we've seen some companies do this is to implement some kind of ESG or sustainability committee. So you're embedding sort of this sustainability aspect in all parts of the business. So it's going to make it easier once you have that structure in place. It'll make it easier to respond to that customer pressure because you'll have sort of the people thinking about it, being able to help with that data collection, essentially setting up those internal data pipelines. But it will also offer benefits to the other parts of the business to unlock some of those additional values once you start looking at things from a sustainability lens and sort of add these new data points to your decision making. I'm looking at the time. I see it's in Colorado, it's 9:50. So we have about 8 minutes left. Just wanted to open it up for questions. Feel free to jump in the chat. Let us know, is there anything that we didn't cover? Any comments? Would love to hear from you. And maybe while we wait for people to ask questions, was wondering, maybe Hannah, Alexis, and Sula, what trends have you seen, both large and small?
Trends regarding pressures specifically?
Sorry, I should have specified. Yes, around customer pressure or just in the sustainability space in general.
Alexis, do you want to take this one?
I think something that I have seen, my other role for the organization is contracts, and I kind of stated that earlier. But the increasing amount of like sustainability language being in contracts tells me that this is something that perhaps they're getting pressure on. Like a lot of our larger companies are these global organizations that are increasingly being asked to disclose. And so while the US at a legislative level doesn't necessarily create the pressure, and I'm, this is something for US companies, I would say, like, don't don't think that you aren't going to be affected by this in other ways, especially if you're working with large global organizations. One other thing, like tangible thing I wanted to share, not related to pressures, was just how helpful Greenly was in for answering EcoVadis. CDP is a bit more like direct questions, whereas EcoVadis, I feel like the way you can answer questions is a bit more up to interpretation. And so being able to reference the platform and provide even like some of the graphics and stuff from it, they have really good, like, here's your major scope 3 things, here's year over year, and providing that data as part of your answer is something that personally helped our organization increase our score, and we had medal distinction last year for the first time. So I know Ryan had asked that question in the chat. Hannah, thanks for bringing that up. I just wanted to share that as far as that's something that really helped us, but we can keep talking about trends and pressure now.
Thank you for the kind words, and so we really believe in tools and leveraging technology to make all of these sort of elements or steps towards responding to customer pressures, advancing sustainability easier, and helping sort of provide a roadmap as well, because I think sometimes that's the challenge, and knowing how do you do it, right, and what are the steps that you need to go through. I could just save a lot of time in terms of research as well. But Alexis, what you said about sort of increased customer pressure, I want to second that. It's I think we're at an inflection point because we're seeing sort of this flywheel effect. Pressures coming from large companies and their supply chains are so large. It's only a matter of time until sort of all these other companies also start measuring their own emissions and realizing that a lot of their emissions comes from scope 3, and realizing that a great way to reduce those scope 3 emissions is by engaging their own supply chains as well. So I think we're going to see a bit of a network effect where pressure is just going to keep building around this.
Yeah, Ryan actually had put a question in the chat related to this a bit about using Greenly for engaging supply chains. I don't know. Salau, maybe you want to talk about that? I know we've talked about that a little bit as far as how the actual platform works.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ryan, for the question. So the way that we do it, we have on the platform a supplier engagement tool. So this tool allows you to browse through a big database that we have of suppliers that for which we have visibility on their climate strategies, if they have set any targets, basically to evaluate or assess their climate maturity. And this is one of the most tangible ways for you to assess the climate maturity of your supply chain, other suppliers who may not be part of your supply chain. And for those who are not part of our database, who we still need to audit, we can send a survey to them and to ask them questions about whether they have a climate strategy, whether they have targets, whether or not they have disclosed to CDP, EcoVadis, a number of questions just to assess where they're at in their climate journey. And it's at the end, when we have all of these suppliers, these companies that have answered these questions, we have a rating system that rates them based on this climate maturity. And this later on, this way, you are able to first precise your scope 3 emissions, so we can apply specific supplier emission factors if you have some transactions linked to these suppliers or any activities linked to the suppliers. And also for you later on, if you would like to review your business partnerships and try to select suppliers based on whether or not they're aligned with your climate strategy, it just allows you to make some decisions. If you have, let's say, your top 3 suppliers that are really, really poorly rated, it would be interesting to see in the database, in the same line of business, what suppliers have been doing more efforts to reduce their emissions and to have a robust climate action plan. So essentially,
Ryan, I think you were also maybe hinting at the fact that based on the type of pressure that you might experience and what framework or standard they're aligning with, sometimes you do have to collect data from your suppliers. So a tool like the Greenly Supplier Engagement can help with that as well and collect all of the data points, information that you need to comply with whatever the requirements are.
I think part of Ryan's question also, it reminds me of a unique experience that G2 kind of, well, it's not unique to G2, but something that I see a lot is that we work a lot with retail clients. And so these retail clients have a large responsibility to communicate to their, the general public, how the products that they might purchase at these retail locations, the different footprints or the emissions involved regarding what goes into the waste or the packaging or the product itself. And so G2 being a waste management company or recycling company, it's a lot of our clients look to us to provide specific data to the waste that they send us, packaging, papers, plastics, and a lot of beauty waste as well. That's like huge, I would say. And so the feature for the supplier engagement with Greenly is really helpful for that too, in supplying that data to their customers. So they can say, okay, well, we've been able to work with G2, who worked with Greenly, who's been able to provide this data. And now we can share with our clients who buy our products exactly what that means.
Yeah. And once you open the can of worms, you can go quite deep. So there's different sort of levels of precision that you can go, different levels to engage your supply chain as well. And that could probably be a topic for a whole other webinar about strategies for creating your own pressure. I know we're at time. Wanted to thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I dropped my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to connect. You can probably tell that we're really passionate about this. So always we feel to touch base and love to discuss how to respond to customer pressure, how to create your own pressure, best practices, strategies. Really don't hesitate to reach out anytime. And we'll send out the slides to everybody after this, and then we'll also have a recording of the webinar posted on our website. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you, Hannah, Alexis, and Salua. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.